Okay, so welcome to the second video on the spatial considerations on sports tourism development. And we know that one of the important things that are also found in spaces are culture. So we're going to talk about the intersection and integration of culture, place, and sport. So, as we have explained, culture, place, and identity are very much interlinked. So, place is intimately tied to culture. So, culture is also very much geographically influenced and modified. The meanings that are attached to sports phases are strongly influenced by cultural context in which sports and tourism exist. So, tourism celebrates culture, sports also is related to culture, and therefore it's also important to look into the cultural context of the place when we are trying to develop, a sports attraction. So, in what ways do we see the expressions of culture in a given place wherein a sports event or a sports attraction is present? So, we have three. We have cultural programs that run in association with sport events. Number two, we also argue that sport in itself is a form of popular culture. And also, we have specific subcultures that are found in a sport that is different from other sport and sometimes even different within sport. So, we'll talk about this separately. So, let's talk about number one, cultural programs that run in association with sport events. And for number one, cultural programs that run in association with sport events. Probably the best example of this would be sports and culture in opening and closing ceremonies found in multi-event sports celebrations, or sport events, especially the Olympics or, for example, recently sa atin, the SEA Games. So there are three possible cultural functions of opening and closing ceremonies in multi-sport events. Okay, so the first function of opening and closing ceremonies is that they can be a unique historic event taking place in that very moment where it's being done. And basically, the opening and closing ceremonies of the sporting event and the whole sporting event itself becomes a part of the historic chain of that given society, state, or country, or region. For example, in the Philippines, the SEA Games, including the opening and closing ceremonies, including all of the establishments and all of the infrastructures that were done, including all the sporting events that had happened, is now a part of Philippine culture and contemporary history. So that's one of the cultural functions of this opening and closing ceremonies. Kaya nga, for example, in the SEA Games, diba, you would notice that those who were carrying the flag were notable and iconic sports personalities in the Philippines. Like, for example, si Efren Bata Reyes, they were holding the flag and they were helping to carry the flag for the national anthem. Because it was important because, like we said, the opening and closing ceremony is kind of tying up, the historical development of sport in the Philippines. Kaya sila ini-include din doon. So the next function is that opening and closing ceremonies are a party. It's an explosion of culture. We showcase our cultural products, icons, cultural symbols, dances, songs, our traditions. We showcase them, It's a theater that is full of joy and a lot of other emotions. It's a commitment that we have and also a lot of passion for sports and culture that is also being showcased in that specific event. And finally, another cultural function is show. So it's an entertainment and it's an introduction to the real excitement which is the sporting events that happen after the opening ceremony. So it kind of ito yung aabangan nating excitement, saya, when we watch the sport. So this is kind of a prelude to that. And of course, for the closing ceremony, it's kind of like, this is how happy we were because of all the sports events that had happened. So this is the next one, the show. Next, why is culture important integration for sport and place? Because sports in itself is a culture in a place, and it's also a part of pop culture. you know. National identity is typically thought of in a way that nations differ from each other in terms of stereotypes, symbols, and practices, including those associated with sport. Like for example, you know, the Philippines as a country has a very strong affinity with boxing because of Manny Pacquiao, or basketball because, you know, we have a lot of star players, especially before. And for example, dance sport, you know, because we really flourish in that. And of course, there are newer sports that we are getting into, like for example, gymnastics, no, weightlifting, pole vaulting, or high jump. No, so these are important parts of our pop culture and our national identity. You know, sports can be a part of our national identity. And also within the sports, we have different subcultures. No, kada isang sport may sarili silang mga practices, beliefs, may sarili-sarili silang mga routines, no? So, for example, different sports have different levels of commitment. No, for example, basketball, especially for yung street basketball, yun mo kailangan ng super duper practice and commitment with, you know, that sport, because it's literally available everywhere. There's a land and there's a, you know, a hoop that you can shoot on, and then you just paint, you know, a man-made basketball court, you know, on your grounds. But like sports, like for example fencing, nabanggit nyo nga, it takes a lot of commitment because it's not easy to find a place and a time for you to do that, you know, and of course the equipment and apparatus. So it takes a little bit more commitment, a little bit more passion to be able to play certain sports. And then of course, sports can also be symbolic. They can hold symbols and they can hold cultural capital. So for example, when you wear your varsity jackets and then you say that I'm part of the swimming team, or I'm part of the fencing team, I'm part of the volleyball team or the badminton team, it already, you know, places a lot of identity in you. Kahit hindi pa kayo kilala ng tao, may idea na sila about you because of the sport that you play. And also within sports, there's also different subcultures in terms of membership. Like for example, in karate, no, or in taekwondo, no, we have the black belters, the blue belters, the yellow belters, and of course the expectation for each group is different. You know, the skill set for each group is different. So yun naman yung subculture within a sport. So now that we have explained that sports is very much tied to culture, we also look into subcultures being tied to a place. Like for example, extreme and outdoor and adventure sports are very much tied to the outdoors, you know, to natural spaces, to mountains, you know, or to the water if it's surfing, etc., etc. So, you know, some sports cannot exist and their cultures cannot be expanded if they are not tied to a place. Now, another example of tourism that is tied up to a place is, of course, golf tourism. You need to have, you know, a physical golf field, you know, in order for you to be able to do the sport and to have an affinity to it. You know, that's part of the whole sports culture within golf tourism. And also the same thing with surf tourism. You know, it is tied to a place, which is the beach. Now, looking into these different meanings that we attach to different sports locations, because of the culture that is brought about by the sport, there are many ways we can market a place through sports. And we kind of discussed this a little bit in some of our previous discussions and some of our previous lectures. So, we can promote them as, of course, major facilities that hold the sport. So, if you want to practice there or train there, pwede naman siya. Or you can market a sports location by doing hallmark events there. No? Like for example, yun nga, regional events, international meets, international competitions. You know, that's an example of hallmark events to market the place. You can also market the place if it's a low hierarchy or low order sports location with a very specific niche market. No, you can also do focus tourism for marketing strategies and policies. No, for example, yun nga, no, if you remember yung example natin with Kaliraya being a good venue for fencing to happen, but you know, you cannot just, you know, do a full mass promotion of that because, you know, not everybody knows or is acquainted with fencing. So usually the marketer is very much focused, targeted on individuals who need them. Probably, I would talk to coaches of fencing and those who organize fencing meets, and probably, offer my location as possible sports location for this. And then we can also have broad-based leisure and cultural opportunities within the destination. So yun nga, for example, you can turn some sports stadium into areas wherein you can do cultural events, or meetings incentives, conferences and events, So this could be ways that you can also do that. So in this short video, we were able to talk about the different ways that sports can express culture, and how the sports that is connected with culture is also connected with the places where the sports are being conducted.